Right now, Trump is bursting into Central Asia, Moscow is in shock, America is advancing, Putin is losing influence, the US's supergame is gaining momentum, Trump is tearing the Caucasus from Moscow's grasp, the world is holding its breath. What will happen next? All the intriguing details are in our report. Watch until the end. Shock! Russia's superfighter jet crashed like a paper airplane. Shame instead of a breakthrough, a real catastrophe on Russian territory. This is the end of Russian aviation. Putin's propaganda tricks have failed. Fakes, occupiers, equipment, and oil refineries are being destroyed by Ukraine's powerful strikes. A loud explosion in the heart of Russia. Retribution for Bucha. The killer colonel has been eliminated. Justice has been served. The way he was torn apart, you have to see it. Explosive assistance. Ukraine is receiving superweapons. Britain and Germany are going all in. The international coalition is breaking the silence. Ukraine's energy and air defense are under impenetrable protection. The details are shocking. This is something you have to see. Shock, scandal in the heart of Europe, Czechia on the brink of a geopolitical Armageddon. A pro-Russian wave is sweeping the country, but Ukraine and the EU have already prepared an incredible move that will turn everything upside down. We'll tell you more soon. Russia has plunged into an economic abyss. War and sanctions are finishing off Russian factories and plants. The central bank is powerless. Russia faces its most terrifying catastrophe yet. All this and more in our program, Hotspot. Trump bursts into the heart of Central Asia. The US president is ready to personally meet with the leaders of the 5 regional countries to discuss trade, investment, and security. All of this is under the banner of strengthening America's position in what was once Moscow's sphere of influence. Russia watches from the sidelines as Washington strategically sets its geopolitical traps. Central Asia is now in the crosshairs of the US. Trump is ready to play big, and it seems the Kremlin once again finds itself as a mere spectator. Watch now for all the details.
Donald Trump has invited the leaders of Central Asia to a U.S. summit. The meeting will take place in the C5+1 format in Washington.
So we can clearly see how the United States and the People's Republic of China are both trying to divide the world, while Russia notably is not being factored into this equation.
On November 6th, the leaders of Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and Uzbekistan will arrive in the American capital.
The United States of America is trying to strengthen its influence in a region that for many years was considered predominantly a Russian sphere of influence.
It should be noted that Central Asia, squeezed between Russia and China and economically dependent on these 2 major neighboring powers, is trying to balance its foreign policy by declaring a multi-vector approach.
We're talking about investments, access to important opportunities, and so much more. To American markets, energy and technology projects, and of course, cooperation in the field of security. For the countries of Central Asia, this is not just a protocol visit. In my opinion, it is a significant and valuable opportunity to balance between major centers of power, such as the United States, Russia, and China. And none of these states wants to end up in a situation where they are forced to choose sides or lose their independence and autonomy. This visit, therefore, represents a chance for these nations to assert their own interests, maintain their sovereignty, and pursue a more balanced and diversified foreign policy approach, in complete dependence on either Moscow or Beijing. And now, at this time, they are clearly demonstrating a willingness to play a more independent role.
The president of Kazakhstan, Kassym-Jomart Tokayev, has already sent a letter to Trump expressing his sincere gratitude for the invitation and called the meeting timely. Tokayev noted that he shares the main goals of the U.S. president's domestic and foreign policy. In particular, the defense of traditional values based on principles of common sense, as well as the American leader's desire to protect peace and security.
He is also actively seeking and carefully considering possible and viable alternatives in the area of foreign policy. Furthermore, he very clearly and fully understands that if the Russian Federation succeeds in achieving some of its stated objectives in Ukraine, then Kazakhstan could very well become one of the next potential victims of the Kremlin's ongoing and aggressive expansionist policy. This awareness significantly influences his cautious and strategic approach to international relations and regional security.
It is reported that the invitation to the countries was preceded by the arrival in Central Asia of the U.S. Special Envoy for South and Central Asia, Sergio Gora, and Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau. I
don't think this will be a very quick process. We have to understand that, after all, these countries have long been within Russia's sphere of influence. And Only recently has China increased its presence, but the United States, given their various capabilities, can gradually win these countries over. And I think that these countries can, in fact, position themselves as those who are pursuing a multi-vector development course on the international stage. And let's put it this way, no one will really be able to make any claims against them for that.
This week, members of the US Congress called on Donald Trump to hold a summit this year with the leaders of Central Asian countries to advance the United States' strategic goals in the region, including security cooperation, economic ties, soft power, and effective governance. This will be the second summit in this format. The first one took place in 2023 in New York on the sidelines of the UN General Assembly.
Yet another unprecedented shock. A Russian fighter jet has crashed from the sky. Disasters are happening one after another. The equipment is falling apart right in the air, while the Kremlin keeps shouting about its great power. Aviation in Russia is heading for disaster. Maintenance is being cut. There are fewer and fewer planes, and the certification of new models has failed again. By 2030, the Russian aircraft fleet could turn into a museum of scrap metal. Yet Putin keeps insisting that everything is under control. Details in the following report.
The Russians have destroyed yet another fighter jet with their own hands. In
Russia, a MiG-31 fighter jet has crashed. The disaster occurred in the Lipetsk region. The crew managed to eject in time. It seems Russia has a new tradition now. MiGs take off only to make a spectacular crash landing.
The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed the information, but of course did not name the cause of the crash.
This is also a problem of the Russian military-industrial complex. It's an issue of supplying spare parts, it's a problem with maintaining the aircraft fleet, and accordingly the fleet itself. For the most part, these are already outdated aircraft of the Russian aerospace forces that have already exceeded their operational lifespan. That's why the accident rate among the Russian aerospace forces aircraft is so high.
But the most interesting thing is that this is already the fourth military plane to crash since the beginning of this year. The first was a Su-25.
According to preliminary reports, the cause of the incident was a technical malfunction.
A month later, in April, a Tu-22 M3 missile-carrying bomber crashed in Irkutsk. And the same fate befell the third Su-34 fighter to crash this year.
The reason was trivial. The landing gear failed to deploy. While the navigator was trying to revive the landing gear, time was ticking away. He ejected, but as they say, he landed hard.
Even without Ukraine's help, Russians are quite successful at destroying themselves and their own equipment. But what is the cause of such disasters?
It's a matter of comprehensive pressure from Western countries. First and foremost from the United States and accordingly the European Union in the form of sanctions packages that prevent the Russian side from fully supplying spare parts to the Russian aerospace forces. Let me emphasize again, this problem also exists in civil aviation. Moreover, at this point, all attempts to implement so-called import substitution programs have essentially failed.
But wait a minute. The Kremlin old man is convinced that everything is just fine with Russia's combat aviation. They even managed to share it.
And now, despite the fact that we ourselves need combat aviation in the context of conducting the special military operation, I do not believe that our aviation industry enterprises are oversized. We not only completely meet all the needs of the armed forces of the Russian Federation today, but also supply the necessary equipment for export. It is in great demand.
At the moment, it should be noted that the Russian Federation has significantly lost its position precisely due to the inability to scale up production of the latest fighter jets and other, accordingly, types of equipment needed by foreign partners. It should be noted that at the moment, the so-called Indian contracts are at risk of falling through.
Well, okay, maybe things are better with civil aviation in Russia.
Today, they're offering you flying coffins, and tomorrow, you won't even have that. At least 4 million people will suddenly lose the ability to receive medical care, vital cargo, or spend the summer on the shores of a warm sea.
But it seems not. There are fewer and fewer operational civil aircraft in Russia, and by 2030, the country risks losing half of its fleet altogether.
Without foreign components, aviation is literally suffocating. Sanctions have cut Russia off from Boeing, Airbus, and their services. And domestic engines and electronics have remained only on paper. This is not just a failure of the industry. This is a diagnosis for the entire Russian economy.
The same goes for spending. Next year, the budget for aircraft production and repair will be reduced by 1.5 times.
The country is effectively sliding backwards and losing its leading position in the global aircraft manufacturing market. Moreover, at this point, the Russian Federation is not even able to make up for the shortage of aircraft equipment on the domestic market.
They promised it by the end of 2025, but unfortunately they miscalculated. Once again, Russia has missed the certification deadline for the new Il-114 aircraft. But strangely enough, the reason for the delay is a lack of components, resources, and technology.
The fakes of Putin's generals have been exposed. The Russian tricolor lasted less than an hour on Ukrainian soil. Another propaganda stunt has failed. The occupiers are crying. A train echelon in Zaporizhzhia has been destroyed. 2 radars and oil depots in Crimea are out of commission. Retribution has caught up with the killer. Justice for the atrocities in Bucha. A Russian colonel has been eliminated. The fakes are collapsing. The occupiers are losing positions. The front is on fire. To find out what has happened on the front line and around it recently and what is happening right now, watch the following report.
Kupiansk is surrounded. The Ukrainian armed forces have been trapped in a pocket. Putin's latest loud statements turned out to be fake. Pokrovsk was under the Russian flag for no more than an hour. The defense forces destroyed the tricolor and cleared out the flag bearers.
They plant flags and record it on video. Of course, afterwards, Russian propagandists feed Russian propaganda, claiming that they are advancing rapidly and quickly capturing some settlements.
An entire trainload of occupiers was destroyed in Zaporizhzhia. In Crimea, the Russians lost a missile system, 2 radars, and 2 oil depots. And also, the main intelligence directorate showed unique footage of the elimination of a Russian lieutenant colonel who commanded atrocities in Bucha. Pokrovsk under the Russian flag. This image was shown by almost all Russian media outlets. They just forgot to mention that the tricolor on the city entrance stele lasted no more than an hour. Another loud victory turned out to be just a banal PR stunt. As our military reported, the rag was discovered at 9:40, and by 10:40 it had already been destroyed.
When these small groups show up somewhere, they stick a flag in, record it on video. Of course, afterwards, Russian propagandists then feed this to Russian propaganda, claiming that they are advancing rapidly and quickly, capturing some settlements. No, this does not mean consolidation, it just means presence.
However, the situation in Pokrovsk itself remains tense, Ukrainian military report. Deep State reports that Russian forces continue to infiltrate the city, gradually increasing their infantry presence and expanding sabotage and reconnaissance activities. The main objective is to advance at any cost and disrupt Ukrainian logistics.
If we take Pokrovsk in a broad sense, the enemy acted from the west to the north, cutting off this logistical route. In the south-southwest from the west, the city entered. Intense fighting is taking place from these directions. City, from the east of Mirnograd. In fact, first of all, Mirnograd still covers Pokrovsk from the east in this general agglomeration.
At the same time, the news about the Russian flag on the stele in Pokrovsk apparently excited Putin so much that he declared the encirclement of the Ukrainian armed forces not only in this city but also in Kupiansk as well. The Joint Forces grouping denied this information, stating that the bunker dweller once again has to make a fool of himself and to repeat the lies of his own generals, lies that not even his own audience believes.
We are conducting both offensive operations in Kupiansk and, accordingly, delivering fire strikes in the area. And the strikes on the dam in particular allow us to neutralize the threat. The reserves that were being brought up along the road and other routes, these highways, where there were bridges, some of them were partially flooded or destroyed. Therefore, at the moment, the ability to bring up reserves has been weakened, and logistics have become even more complicated. And we are observing this directly on the battlefield. Of course, the complications are due to both the water and the weather. So, in this situation, The enemy cannot effectively deploy large reserves or operate very efficiently in terms of advancing.
And by the way, about the flooding, the destruction of that very dam near Belgorod continues to benefit the Ukrainian armed forces at the front. In the Kharkiv region, the water keeps rising and sweeping away everything in its path. In particular, Russian troops still remain cut off from their units. But now, due to the rising floodwaters, the Russian command admits that it is simply impossible to establish logistics. And
those enemy units that are near the mouth of the Volchya River, which flows into the Siversky Donets, in other words, it's a tributary of the Siversky Donets, the Volchya River, they could end up effectively encircled since the water is already flooding and will continue to spread. It will wash away the pontoon bridges, destroy them, and the crossing the enemy set up will be eliminated by the water itself. And in this way, the Russians will find themselves trapped in a pocket. That's what this threatens for them. And all their attempts to advance in the Vovchansk area, which we've observed in recent weeks, have been happening one way or another. Their efforts, according to reports, will fail.
the Russian group is also taking hits in the rear. For example, in the Zaporizhzhia region, the GUA derailed an entire train of occupiers the other day. It is reported that the train was literally packed with military cargo. As a result of the explosion, about 70 meters of railway track were destroyed. Scattered along the twisted tracks were a locomotive, 3 railway platforms, and at least 9 freight cars from the military train. Another setback awaited the Russians in Crimea. There, SPU drones destroyed a Panzer S-2 anti-aircraft missile system last night, worth about $20 million. By the way, it is one of the key components of the enemy's air defense system. The enemy also lost 2 radar stations. And after clearing the way, the cherry on top was the explosions at the oil depots in the village of Gvardeyskoye and at the Komsomolskoye base. Large-scale fires broke out at the sites. Experts say the reason for all this is the continued redeployment of air defense systems from the peninsula.
The expansion of the defense system. For example, around Moscow, the buildup is happening at the expense of something else, by draining resources from other sites. For now, they have been completely drained. The Far East and Siberia. Putin and his generals believe that our drones can't reach there. Well, that's still up for debate. Nevertheless, as Russian systems are destroyed and Moscow's air defense network becomes denser, the focus keeps shifting. They won't be able to produce more air defense systems than they already can. If they concentrate them in some places, it means they're simply leaving other places exposed.
And finally, yet another spectacular GUR operation in Russia. Our intelligence officers reminded everyone that not a single Russian crime will go unpunished. They blew up a lieutenant colonel from the Oman unit who had overseen executions in the Kiev region during the first months of the war. The deceased, Veniamin Majorin, was eliminated in his own car on the way to work.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Sensational news. Ukraine is receiving ultra-powerful air defense systems. Britain and Germany are already sending the latest weaponry. The UK is mass-producing Shahed killers. Thousands of interceptors are being shipped straight from the factories to the front lines. The international coalition is on the case. New military aid packages have already been agreed upon. Ukraine's skies and energy infrastructure are under the reliable protection of its allies. See the details in the following report.
Russia is ramping up its strikes on Ukraine's energy system and changing its tactics from... Moscow is launching hundreds of drones capable of penetrating air defense systems and equipped with cameras for improved targeting.
Russia has turned its strikes on Ukraine's energy infrastructure into a systematic operation aimed not just at temporarily damaging the networks, but at destroying the viability of large areas of the country. On the eve of winter, the goal of these attacks is to deprive regions of heat and electricity, undermine industry, provoke mass emigration, and create political pressure on Kyiv, writes The Economist.
In these circumstances, air defense becomes critically important. But this year, Western partners are acting proactively, strengthening Ukraine's skies and energy system before the cold sets in.
We are not just now starting to prepare for this winter period. We began preparations back at the end of the previous winter season.
As early as November, the UK will begin mass production of Ukrainian anti-aircraft drones. This is the essence of the joint project between Kyiv and London, aimed at quickly protecting the skies from enemy drones and missiles.
Our Ukrainian friends will share their technologies and intellectual property with the UK, and in turn we will further develop them and produce them on a large scale, so that we can supply Ukraine with thousands of interceptor drones every month, said El Carnes, the UK's Deputy Secretary of State for the Armed Forces, in Parliament.
These drones will become part of a system called the Air Shield. It will combine Western air defense systems such as Patriot, Ares, T, NASAMS, as well as new mobile installations. These are being provided to Ukraine by Germany and other allies before the start of winter. The first drones will be tested by Ukrainian military personnel. If the tests are successful, production will be expanded, and some of the drones will likely be manufactured directly in Ukraine. At the same time, the UK authorities are expanding their multi-purpose missile production program. It is planned to deliver 5,000 units of this weapon to Ukraine to strengthen its air defense.
We're also announcing an increase in the production program in the UK to provide Ukraine with 5,000 new multi-purpose missiles. This makes it possible to create new jobs in Belfast and other cities, as well as to strengthen Ukraine's air defense for the coming winter.
At the same time, European allies are stepping up their support for Ukraine's energy sector. Germany and other NATO countries are mobilizing resources, from air defense missiles to support for the energy sector, so that Ukraine can withstand the winter and not succumb to attacks on its critical infrastructure.
Germany has already paid 390 million euros, with another 30 million to come. We agreed on this in the summer, but today I want to announce that we will invest an additional 30 million. Thus, we are providing a total of 450 million euros. These funds will make it possible to acquire the necessary technical equipment to help save Ukraine.
In addition, EU countries are preparing a winter support package. To the 3 billion euros already provided, a new guarantee of 800 million has been added for the emergency purchase of gas. This was reported by the EU ambassador to Ukraine, Katerina Maternova. The aid covers repairs to power grids as well as the supply of generators and transformers.
We have also provided and continue to provide a lot of assistance in the energy sector, not only with generators for people and businesses, but also with transformer and compressor stations to help restore power grids, gas distribution networks, and compressors that supply gas from storage facilities that have been distributed. We also provide financial support to state-owned enterprises and major energy companies for the repair of their equipment. We are also supplying more than 2 gigawatts of electricity per day.
Thus, support for Ukraine this winter is reaching a new level, from modern air defense systems to reliable energy supply. And whatever the Kremlin may be planning, Ukraine, together with its allies, is aiming not just for tactical success, but for strategic success, to withstand the cold, to preserve strength, and to maintain the ability to defend itself.
Europe is in panic. Pro-Russian forces are coming to power in the Czech Republic, and this could mark the beginning of a new crisis in the EU. Diplomatic relations with Kyiv are under threat, and statements from the new leaders sound like an ultimatum to the West. Is the Czech Republic really yielding to the Kremlin? What will the EU do? Find out all the details right now.
In the Czech elections, the ANO party, led by former Prime Minister, billionaire and Eurosceptic Andrej Babiš, came in first. He is well known for his, to put it mildly, pro-Russian views and his sympathy for leaders like Orbán and Fico.
Ukraine is not ready for the European Union. We must first end the war. We can cooperate, but you are not ready.
Babiš is also called the Czech Trump, who is likely a fan of the US president. The pro-European Together coalition of current Prime Minister Petr Fiala received more than 20% support. The country has elected deputies who will decide which course the Czech Republic will take for the next 4 years.
The idea that we will drag the Czech Republic somewhere to the east is a lie that politicians from the government use to scare people.
None of the parties managed to overcome the 50% threshold, and the next government in the country will be a coalition. However, the coalition may be official or informal.
The current prime minister is from the center-right. I think they will also try to form their own coalition.
Babiš made many promises to increase social benefits and lower taxes, but took a cautious stance on a number of European Union initiatives. Similar statements have long been made by the leaders of 2 other EU countries, Hungary and Slovakia.
Now, If we imagine a scenario where Babiš does become prime minister, I think he will seek communication with both Orban and Fico. And we will end up with a kind of triumvirate of Central European countries that, to put it mildly, are not very positive toward Ukraine. We already feel this from Orban, to a lesser extent from Fico, but there are still some conflicts, and now Babiš will be added to them. And what is very important is that this is yet another force that, let's say, carries an anti-EU ideology.
On the first day of the elections, the Czech police received anonymous threats about a large number of drones approaching the country's borders. Security measures were heightened in Prague and at Václav Havel Airport. The Kremlin tried to stir up the situation in its usual style. Right before the vote, a large-scale network operating to promote Russian narratives was uncovered in the Czech Republic. Analysts identified about 300 anonymous TikTok accounts that were actively spreading propaganda in favor of radical parties advocating for the Czech Republic's exit from NATO and the European Union. At the same time, the parties denied any foreign influence on their election campaigns. The main goal of the Kremlin in every European country is to undermine faith in democratic mechanisms, legal norms, as well as membership in the EU and NATO.
Russia is the most serious threat to the country's security.
The victory of Babiš's party seemed to please the Kremlin, but as usual, the happiness was incomplete. It will not secure a majority, which means the party leader will have to look for partners. The problem is that he'll have to look among those who openly call him a populist, playing into Moscow's hands. Andrej Babiš served as the Prime Minister of the Czech Republic from December 2017 to December 2021. His party was defeated in the 2021 parliamentary elections. In January 2023, former NATO general and current Czech President Petr Pavel defeated Babiš in the presidential election. And today, in 2025, the main role will shift to the non-partisan President Petr Pavel, who will be tasked with appointing the government. Now, the main question is whether Babiš can become prime minister again.
The prime minister has more power than the president, but the president also has a certain influence on the country's political processes. There is a kind of balance of power. And we understand that hypothetically, Prime Minister Babiš and accordingly President Pavel are different people, representing different political forces. Accordingly, this will already be a president-prime minister conflict, if again, it turns out to be exactly Babiš as prime minister. If ANO party still manages to unite all the other forces around itself.
Babiš himself openly denies any sympathy for the Kremlin, recalling an incident when he was already prime minister. His government labeled 18 Russian diplomats as spies and expelled them from the country. When, as a result of the investigation into the ammunition depot explosions, it turned out that it was not just anyone, but Russian special services behind them.
It's a paradox, but there are practically no official materials regarding this case.
But soon after, Babiš once again started talking about the need for dialogue and the importance of economic ties with Russia.
There is an opinion that Babiš reportedly acquired much of his money thanks to Russian funds. Accordingly, he is perceived as someone who has close financial ties with Russia, close ties with the Kremlin, and this poses a threat to Ukraine.
So how will the victory of the right in the Czech elections affect Ukraine? This worries not only Ukrainians themselves, but also Europeans.
I have met with Zelensky 3 times. We help Ukraine through the EU. We pay large sums into the European budget. So we are already helping.
During the campaign, Babiš criticized what he considered excessive aid to Ukrainian refugees.
First, they raised taxes for Czech parents, took away child benefits, and cut privileges. And now just imagine, they're coming up with new things. Maternity leave for Ukrainian women, not for our women, but for Ukrainians.
As a right-wing populist, he has repeatedly spoken about the need to cut or roll back aid programs for Ukraine. But experts believe that his rhetoric could change dramatically after the elections.
People promise a lot of things, but when they win the elections and come to power, they can drastically change their stance. After all, slogans they use to get elected are one thing, but what they actually have to do, considering the redistribution of the EU budget, is another. A person might really campaign and say that aid to Ukraine should be stopped, that everything should be cut off, but then comes to power and realizes that it's not that simple. Because of this, they might end up missing out on funds from the EU budget. Plus, there are the risks that we all see for European countries, risks that Poland sees, that Finland, Denmark, and Norway see. So all these sentiments are present as well. And the image of a force that would act as a hypothetical collaborator with Russia is something nobody wants.
Russia faces crisis as the Russian Federation collapses, the economy collapses, industry nears breakdown, and Russian factories vanish. Even in the turbulent 90s, it wasn't like this. Russia is sliding into the economic pit of the century. All the details are in the following report.
Resources are nearly depleted, and claims about the stability of the Russian economy don't hold up to the facts.
There's really no other way to describe it honestly. This is not our choice. We don't want things to turn out this way.
Putin is trying to bluff and save face by creating an illusion of success. But it's all in vain. The Russian economy is rapidly going downhill. Almost 80% of the country's industry has fallen into recession.
When we talk about individual sectors, it means that production in these sectors, compared to the same period, usually the previous year, is getting worse. In other words, things aren't improving, they're getting worse. And that's exactly what a recession is, this very decline when you're in the negative. And when a recession becomes prolonged, that is, when it lasts not just 1 year, but say 3 or 4 years of decline, then it's no longer a recession, it's a depression.
Finally, in September, the overall growth of industrial production in Russia slowed to 0.3% year-on-year. That's almost 19 times less than last year.
There simply aren't enough people available to help, and there just aren't enough financial resources or funds to pay for the delivery and transportation of all the necessary components for purchasing the goods you need for processing. As a result, you end up producing less. And when you produce less, there you have it, a recession, a negative compared to the previous period.
A particularly sharp decline is seen in those civilian industries that were supposed to replace the products of foreign companies that left Russia after the start of the full-scale war.
The collapse of import substitution when the plans were let's replace everything. But to replace everything, you have to produce what you'll use as a substitute. And if you don't produce it, then what will you use to substitute? How are you going to carry out this import substitution if you're not doing anything? So this is without a doubt, any downturn in the economy means that goods are not being produced. If they're not being produced, then accordingly, there's no point in keeping the people who make them. And that leads to unemployment. Becoming unemployed is always an unpleasant experience.
In fact, the domestic market is deprived of consumer goods, and Russian factories are unable to make up for the shortage.
Even now, it would seem, even the military sector, part of the military sector, which is the production of weapons and ammunition. In September of this year, compared to September of last year, Russia is down 1.3%. So even the production of weapons and ammunition is already in the negative. Not to mention the rest of the economy, which is showing even worse results.
The central bank has predicted that Russia could face its worst economic decline since the 1990s if sanctions are tightened. If the situation doesn't improve, by 2026 the Kremlin could lose $108 billion in export revenues.
Here the problems are, let's say, just starting to gain momentum. But their implementation, the first one we're seeing, is that taxes in Russia have been rising since the beginning of the year. The federalization levy will start on December 1st, and the environmental tax is increasing almost tenfold from November 1st, which is literally in a week or even just a couple of days. So it turns out that all these various economic problems are cropping up more and more often, and they're constantly appearing in the news. Because, you know, it's a zugzwang situation when you don't have any good options.
Russian Sberbank, following Gazprom, has begun mass layoffs. In the first quarter, the staff of the largest bank, which holds half of all individual deposits, decreased by 8,600 employees, in the second quarter by 3,500, and in the third by 1,500.
From Superbank of Russia, when they see, here's a direct quote from Superbank's head, Herman Greff, throughout 2025, there is not a single new investment project that Superbank is working on. So the people responsible for this area are not doing anything. And since they're not doing anything, meaning there's no point in paying them a salary, they're being laid off. That's why laying people off is a demonstration that there is no demand for the economic functions that Superbank provides. And accordingly, these people are being cut. But this is just one of many examples.
That's the reality. Only Putin is trying to hide it all. But there's nowhere left to go. The economy is cracking. The country is losing money.
That's all for now. And for more hot news from the front, tune in to the next episode.